So welcome. My name is Dr. Ashley Cartwright, and I am the head of Division of Criminology of Crime, Policing and Society at the University of Huddersfield. I'm a psychologist by my training, and I'm going to be talking to you today about this topic of understanding mental health in crime, policing and justice. So just to give you a bit of a background, we have a huge range of online talks, and these are designed for schools and for students studying at A-level and college to understand a little bit more about our disciplines, which the area that I look after at this university includes criminology, policing and sociology. So the talks are very varied, and I'll tell you about them today. But our first talk is about understanding mental health in crime and policing and justice. So although this is very much criminological related, it's very relatable to sociology as well, because mental health and well-being is perhaps a huge part of society. And these talks, what we're trying to do is to try to inspire you to want to study these subjects and to really demonstrate to you the importance of why we need to study them. And that is my role today. My role today is to really try to open your eyes to some of the complicated issues we have around mental health in crime and policing. Now, I'm not sure what level of study you're at, whether it's most of you are A level, but whether that's AS level or A level. I'm guessing it's A level because that's what you guys have put. So you will know quite a little bit about the criminal justice system and a little bit about mental health, particularly if you study psychology. And what you probably know today is a lot more than 16 to 18-year-olds 10 to 15 years ago. We know so much more about mental health now, and that is known as mental health literacy. So our mental health literacy as a society is much higher. So you know probably what depression is. You probably know what schizophrenia is, or you'll have heard of it. So if you're in a classroom, perhaps, shout out to your teacher, how many different types of mental health issues do you know of? How many can you think of? You probably know a lot more than you perhaps think. And that is because we as a society are moving forward more, and we know a lot more about mental health. Now, I teach about this in one of our modules here at the university, and we have a full module really looking at mental health and crime. And I've not got enough time to tell you everything there is to know. But our understanding of mental health today is one that is much further forward, but also at the same time, we still don't seem to be making as much progress as we need to. So we kind of know now that mental health issues are caused by a variety of factors. In most cases, individuals have what we call a genetic predisposition, which means that they're at a heightened risk. So there's some genetic underlying predisposition to developing a mental health illness. So the family members may have suffered previously. And typically, such mental health, such underlying genetic predispositions are not activated unless sort of a traumatic event happens or a significant life event happens. So for many people, they may have an underlying predisposition, but they may never develop a serious mental health problem. But when somebody does, it's usually because they've been exposed to an environmental factor that has triggered that. And in most cases now, all of us at some point in time will experience some form of mental health issue, whether that's anxiety or depression, at a sort of less severe level. But far fewer people will suffer with much more severe mental health difficulties. And as such, because of these different situations that we now know predispose people to mental health, we know a lot more about its relationship with offending. Before I talk about this, I wonder, as a class or writing down yourself, what do you think is the relationship between mental health and crime? Do we think that there is a relationship? So do you think that offenders are more likely to have mental health problems? Are all offenders suffering mental health problems, or is there no relationship? Do you think it's a cop-out? What do you think as a classroom? Maybe shout out at your teacher, it's a discussion point. What we do know, And what you probably, if I was asked you to draw an offender or write down some key words about what you know about offenders, you'd probably say that they're these bad individuals who are different to you or I. But in reality, what we know about individuals who offend is that they are quite vulnerable individuals. They come from traumatic backgrounds. And because they come from traumatized backgrounds and they have difficult upbringings, sometimes they're from different socioeconomic backgrounds. This means that they're perhaps more likely to have suffered with mental health problems. What we do know now is that most mental health problems are associated some way with offending. If we go back to the 70s and the 80s, it was commonly thought that schizophrenia had no association with violence. So schizophrenia, if you're not aware, is a psychotic disorder which manifests itself with the patient or the individual suffering with that disorder typically hearing and seeing things that do not exist. And we call those positive symptoms. And the media would sensationalize cases where somebody suffering with psychosis and schizophrenia, where they had been violent. We've had lots of very big cases where this has happened. And this led to lots of problems in psychiatry. And it led to psychiatry as a discipline actually saying there is no relationship between schizophrenia and crime. But we've moved on a lot more, and the research that we have now, it shows that there is a significant relationship between schizophrenia and violence. So somebody suffering with schizophrenia is at a much higher chance of committing violence than somebody without. But this is where the key issues, what we need to consider. Individuals with schizophrenia only reflect roughly 1% of our society. So although it increases the risk of somebody being violent, having that disorder, they reflect, a tiny, tiny proportion of society. And as such, nearly the entirety of offenders do not suffer with that disorder. So you can see that there's quite complex relationships to understand. We know that individuals who suffer with what's called bipolar disorder, if they're in a state of mania, which is a state of elation, a state of where they're sort of going from A to Z very quickly, very fast thoughts, and they typically undertake risky behaviors when in a state of mania, they're more likely to take part in criminal activity than somebody who's not. And it's the same for depression as well. All of the literature suggests that there is an increase in chance of committing an offence or being an offender if you suffer from a mental health problem. But individuals with such severe mental health problems make up far fewer of our society. So as such, the vast majority of offenders, typically wouldn't have had a mental health condition in the commission of their crimes. So it's a difficult and complex relationship to understand. And what we do understand is that actually individuals who suffer with very severe mental health conditions are actually much more likely to be a victim of crime than an offender. But nonetheless, there is a relationship between offending and crime. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one to understand, and it's most likely due to the fact that what we know about offenders is that they come from very difficult, traumatized backgrounds. And what we know about mental health causation and individuals suffering mental health problems is that mental health conditions usually only manifest themselves after trauma or difficult life circumstances. So that's offending. So we need individuals to know much more about mental health conditions. We need individuals to know lots more about these issues. And this is why, we want to inspire you to study such subjects and to go on and understand, these issues and to go out into the workplaces of criminal justice or research roles so we can have a better understanding. Now, my role here at the university, I've undertaken lots of research, typically in a policing context, as a psychologist supporting the police. But within the team that we have here at the university, we have lots of different individuals from different backgrounds. And I thought what I wanted to do was to introduce you to these colleagues and to tell you a little bit about them and their thoughts about well-being in the criminal justice system. So we know offenders suffer with mental health problems, but what about police officers? Well, this is my area of expertise, or where I've been doing the most of my work. Police officers are exposed to many different things. Think about this in the classroom now. Maybe write it down, maybe shout it out. What sort of things do police officers have to do that might make them suffer with mental health problems? What traumatic events are they gonna see? Dr. Paul Ogden, who's one of our senior lecturers here and teaches on our policing courses, he was an ex-detective of 33 years. He worked within intelligence. He worked within counter-terrorism, and he actually was part of the investigation into Harold Shipman during the earlier years of his career, and he ended his career investigating the horrific incident of the Manchester Arena bombing. So just as this one detective, think about what he has just been exposed to there. Lots of different traumatic situations that are happening to other people, but he's exposed to. And that's known as vicarious trauma. So where we're exposed to somebody else's suffering, and that in itself has a huge impact. So there's just some quotes here. I asked Paul, what does he think about well-being within the police? And he said these things to me. So some of the content that detectives are exposed to, it'll stay with them for life. It impacts their well-being and it impacts their job. So lots of the problems that we have in the police services, police officers are routinely exposed to horrific events, whether it is a child who has died and they have to investigate it, to whether it is something to do with investigating terrorism and speaking with victims. They're exposed to lots of different things. And it's not just the police officers, as Paul reiterates, his colleagues he has seen with mental health problems, offenders have had mental health problems, and victims have mental health problems. The key message is starting to come through here, that mental health and well-being is endemic within our criminal justice system, and we need future generations of individuals to study these topics for us to get better understanding. And I don't have lots of time to tell you about the issues we have, but on a policing perspective, I can tell you one of the number one problems we have is that we have lots of police officers suffer with mental health problems, but not a lot of police officers accessing wellbeing support. Not that it's not offered, it's just that they perhaps do not want to access it. And what this leads to is an accumulation of illness. Lots of individuals perhaps get into a breaking point where their well-being is so bad that they have to leave the service or take a period of absence. And obviously this is operationally very difficult. But police officers are just one area of the police service. There are actually far more roles. If you're thinking about what jobs you might want to do, the police employ hundreds of thousands of people just in this country. Police staff roles are very different. So police staff are individuals who are not police officers. They don't have the powers of police officers, but they are a police staff member. So Dr. Annie Marsland, who works for us part-time, but also works as a police staff investigator for the other part of her work, Annie is an abusive images investigator, and I won't go into detail about what that includes, but it includes looking through lots of imagery relating to abuse in relation to children. So Annie's exposed to that, and her colleagues are exposed to that in order to investigate and collect the evidence needed to prosecute individuals who commit such offences. Now, if you think that you have to look through that imagery just once, you could see that that would probably cause you to be traumatized. To think about that would be very, very upsetting and difficult. But we have people who are doing this right now, who are working 8 to 11-hour shifts, looking through and sifting through very traumatic imagery. And Annie mentions this, and she said to me, lots of the difficult things about this is that the staff who are involved can't openly go and talk about this to counsellors, to psychotherapists, because they're not allowed to share such information, or the therapist won't necessarily talk about that. And that means that they have to rely upon colleagues, and that adds an extra stress and burden. So we can see there are problems. The criminal justice system, studying criminology, studying society, studying policing, there are lots and lots of issues. Mental health is not just affecting offenders, it's not just affecting police officers, it's not just affecting police staff. What about probation officers? Well, Dr. Vicky Barrett, who's one of our senior lecturers here, was a probation officer for 10 years before joining us. And Vicky talks about how there's a significant impact on anybody who is responsible for working with individuals who have committed serious offences. If you're responsible, I don't know how much you know about what a probation officer does, but a probation officer is somebody who's in the community, who's managing people who have come to the end of their sentence, or towards the end of their sentence, when they're being reintegrated back into the community. And the probation service in England and Wales has had major reforms, major problems with privatisation, as something that you would learn about. But probation officers have to deal with individuals who have significant mental health problems. These are individuals who are who have been offenders, and that is very difficult for them to manage. It's stressful for probation officers. The caseloads of managing hundreds of serious violent offenders in the community, and the impact of trying to manage that to try to ensure they don't offend, causes mental health problems for probation officers as well. And Vicky mentioned that over the 10-year period that she worked in probation, there was a significant reduction in the support available to the probation officers. So we're moving to probation officers now. We can see it's a problem there. It's a problem with the individuals who have come out of prison. Now, I'll come back to prison in a moment, because prison itself is a problematic factor for us. And I'll tell you the headline before, that prison can cause mental health problems. Go back to when the COVID pandemic was. Think about that for a moment. Think about how you felt not being able to see your friends, perhaps, or not being able to socialize as much, and perhaps having to stay inside all the time. That gives you a tiny, tiny insight into what it's like to be incarcerated. And if it made you feel a little bit more upset or less well, I'm not sure the right adjective here, you can only understand the extent of what prison can cause for offenders. Now, probation officers have to pick that up. You know, when an offender leaves and probation officer then takes over, they might now have mental health problems because of their incarceration. What about families of offenders? Families are victims too. Professor Rachel Armitage, one of our professors of criminology here, who you can see in the photo on the slide, Rachel has been undertaking lots of research surrounding what we know as the knock. So the knock refers to when the police knock on somebody's door to arrest them, and this could be anybody. So Rachel's research looks at individuals who have been arrested for child sexual offences. Now, these individuals will be married, would have children, and the police will knock on the door and they will arrest that person in front of their family. That family member, that spouse, may never have known about any of this. The person that they have been married to for years, the father, the mother, that their children had, is not the person that they've known. Their world has just been completely shattered. It's completely turned around. And that in itself is a hugely traumatic event. And so what we can see is that we've got families who are suffering with mental health problems because of individuals who were and are their loved ones who have committed serious offences and have been arrested. So we can see it's endemic. It's endemic within the criminal justice system. And that leads me to victims themselves. What about direct victims? If you've suffered an assault, even if you've been burgled and broken into, that leads to feelings of anxiety. If we look at the crime survey for England and Wales, what used to be the British Crime Survey, you can look at that. You can look at that data yourself in class. You can see that being a victim of crime causes well-being issues. It might be that you're worried about leaving the house. It might be that you're worried about being in certain locations, places, might be worried about going to work. Being a victim of crime is a hugely traumatic event, which is certainly going to be a causal factor of well-being issues. And finally, I come back to prison. So one of our current PhD students, Jonathan, who is the head of substance misuse services, talks about the issues that he sees on a daily basis. He said to me in a conversation surrounding this talk, he said, mental health issues amongst prisoners are rife. We only have to look at the academic literature to know that, and I can tell you about that in a moment. But in his day-to-day role working with substance misuse, so individuals who abuse alcohol and drugs within prisons, he witnesses offenders suffering daily, and this mental health and this traumatic experience of being in prison may also, and often does, leads to the individuals suffering with substance, turning to substances to deal with their pain. And unfortunately, we need lots more individuals within the prison service to understand the relationship between the prison environment itself, substance misuse, and crime, because all of these different areas are linked. If we look at the academic literature, we have lots of problems with understanding the extent of mental health within our prisons because of lack of access and of lack of funding. We also have problems with offenders actually being able to access what we call appropriate care. So they don't necessarily have access to the same care that you or I have on the NHS. And what we also know is that offenders themselves often come in with mental health problems. And what we also know is that prisons can be a causal factor in mental health problems and exacerbate and make worse individuals suffering with mental health problems. So that is a real toxic mix. And what we really need to think about is we need to look at what do we do about all of this. The police service needs better support and better encouragement and better uptake of mental health support. The probation service is similar. Offenders themselves, prior to offending in general society, we need better mental health care, better support in order to reduce poor well-being, which may lead to offending. In the prison service, we need a lot more work. We need a lot of work into understanding the role of the prison service. We need a lot of training with prison staff. We need a lot more access to services. There's a huge amount of work within the criminal justice system that we need to look at for us to get a better understanding. And that is why such degree programs that we do offer here would be leading us to a society that has more understanding of these issues. So to give you a whistle-stop tour, within most of these courses, you would look at well-being with health, mental health, and different situations. But within our area, these are the undergraduate courses that we teach, from criminology to professional policing to social sciences and psychology. And really, the future, what we need is we need individuals to study such degrees, to then go out into the criminal justice system and make and affect change, to give us a better understanding for the future, to improve well-being in the criminal justice system for those who have to perhaps undertake the most difficult jobs, looking through horrendous imagery, to investigating serious crimes against children, to those individuals who are perhaps victims of the system from an early age, who have been traumatized and have then maybe gone on to a life of crime. That could be you. That could be you could be studying about these topics. You could go on to a potential career to make those changes and affect those changes. Now, some of the other things to finalize before I hand over to my colleague Peggy, who is going to give you a more practical talk about university life. We have some other initiatives to let you know about. So if you're interested of learning about what it's like to be a student here or any other university, feel free to follow our Student Story TikTok page, which will be launching this week and next week, as term starts. So you can follow two of our second year undergraduate students on their journey, and they will be TikToking, if that's the right term. I don't know, please apologize if it's not. And you can follow them and see what they are learning about, what they are doing, and what their life is at Huddersfield is about. You can scan the QR code, but I'll also put the link in the chat which your teachers can distribute. And if you want to know more about our university, more about those courses I've mentioned, we do have an open day. I think the 30th is it a week on Saturday? Yeah. And we have a list of open days. Again, you can scan the QR code to book on them, to come and have a look at our award-winning campus and to hear really about those courses. And if you enjoyed my talk and you want to learn more about some challenging and key challenging areas that our society face, please book on to some of our other talks. We have talks happening every single month of this year. So the next talk is about housing asylum seekers. Remember, these talks are about society, crime and policing. And we have lots of our colleagues here who are going to deliver inspirational talks and try to inspire you into studying such subjects, because we've got a lot of problems to address as society, and the future really is with individuals who graduate and go on to work in these areas. So there's a list of talks on here. You can book onto them. All of you who are here today, the 2 or 3 schools that we have here today, you're obviously receiving the mailings. You're on the mailing list. So yeah, and all of these talks will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel for you to use as learning materials within your sessions. But if you want something else, if you want to come to our university, or you would like one of our academics to come out and deliver a bespoke session to you, please do let us know. We can deliver mini lectures, interactive sessions around topics, academic topics, or topics related to applying to university, studying at university, or student life. If you would like to know more, would like to arrange to be paired up with one of our academics, please email Lindsay, who is our outreach coordinator, who can set all of that up for you.